want to thank you for taking the time today for the Plus Group webinar series. Today's topic is Sales Lessons from the Masters, and will be presented to you by Ken Smith, Director of Health Product Sales at Assurity Life Insurance Company. Please note that all lines will be muted during this webinar. If you would like to ask a question, please go to your question pane on your control panel and you type it in. We will answer the questions at the end of the webinar. You can type them in anytime during the webinar. Also note that we are recording this. It will be sent to you along with the presentation, so you'll get an audio as well as the presentation sent to you in a follow-up email, and you should have that within 24 hours. Okay, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. Thanks again, and I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Ken Smith.
Thank you, Tracy. I want to thank all my good friends at the Plus Group for inviting me to do this. And one of the things I want to remind everyone on the call, the Plus Group is really the best group that you can work with when it comes to income protection, critical illness, and long-term care. The session this afternoon is going to be a little bit different than probably any webinar you've ever attended. For the next 30 minutes, and some of you are going to laugh, I am not going to talk about critical illness or disability income. What I want to do, the first thing, is I want to challenge you with this webinar today, to pick one idea that you can use and put to use right away. This webinar came about, I just completed a book. It's called Sales Lessons from the Masters. And this came about because of a number of sales training meetings that I did back in 2013. And what I did was work in sales principles from Frank Bettger, Clement Stone, Ben Feldman, and Joe Gandolfo. Those are four salespeople who had a great impact on myself and my career. And what happened when I started incorporating this into my sales presentations was the long-time agents, notice I'm not saying old, the long-time agents who've been in the business and who are about my age said, hey, those are great ideas. I can't figure out why we stopped using them. And the younger agents who this is really focused on thought, they were hearing these ideas for the first time, and then they said, that is great. And I had a couple people that said, Ken, you really need to sit down and put this all into a book so it's all in one place. And the basis for the book is really pretty simple. Success and sales principles are like the laws of nature. If it's a principle, it works 100% of the time. It's kind of like the law of gravity. If you jump off the roof of a building, you're going to come crashing to the earth. So sales and success principles work the same way. If it's a principle, it happens 100% of the time. And what I've done with the four that I focused on is really break it out into two sections. First section is go through each of the master salespeople, and what are the unique principles? I asked, what are the unique principles that we can learn from each one of them? And then the second section of the book is I started asking myself, what are the common denominators among all four that made them so successful? So it's broken out into two parts, and one of the things I want to remind you is when you stop and think about it, the principles are really simple. The key and where the effort comes in is really mastering those principles. And as I wrote this out, Vince Lombardi came to mind, because one of the things, he had the great success as coach of the Green Bay Packers. And the reason he was so successful is because he focused on fundamentals or basic principles. And, there's always a story out there about him that, when he started with the Packers, first meeting, he said, we're starting with the basics. And he held up a football and said, this is a football. So this is all basic. It's all basic fundamentals. This is Frank Bettger. Frank Bettger wrote the book, How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling. I will tell you, this is the book that kept me in this business the first year. When he was writing about all the trials and tribulations of starting out in this industry, I read the book and I said, hey, somebody really went through the exact same things I did, and he was able to deal with it, and he shared with how he was able to deal with it. If you look on Amazon, the book How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling was written over 65 years ago, but there are over 250 recent comments about the book. I consider that incredible. I've even taken the book and did 3 sessions with our regional sales managers, our regional sales coordinators, and our Platinum Service Unit to get their feedback on the book, and they all found it valuable. The success principles or the sales principles from Frank Bettger are enthusiasm, see the people, the secret of leads, the secret to sales, which is questions, planning and study, sell yourself, and story sell. And what I'm going to do today with each one of these individuals is I'm going to focus on one principle, and if you want more, you can get a copy of the book. But the one from Bettger is Bettger, before getting in the insurance business, was a baseball player, and he was fired from a minor league team because the manager thought he was lazy. So he got fired, got on with another team, and he made up his mind that no one was ever going to call him lazy again. And the temperature with his first game with this new team was like 100 degrees. He made up his mind that he was going to go out there and put enthusiasm to use. And so what happened was he found that when he acted enthusiastic, it overcame his fears. It also affected all the other players on the team. And then the third thing he said was he felt better after the game than he did before the game. And when Bettger was failing in the insurance business, they had cut off his draw, but he knew he had fears that he had to overcome, whether he did it selling life insurance or anything else. And he went to a Dale Carnegie course, and Dale Carnegie was talking that night about enthusiasm and the importance of enthusiasm. He went back and he thought about it after sitting in on that session. He thought about his baseball career and how the enthusiasm saved his baseball career. And he determined to apply it to his selling career. And, as they say, the rest is history. He went back, he overcame his fears, he became successful. But I want you to think about enthusiasm for a minute. What happens to your prospect when you are enthusiastic? They become enthusiastic. One of the basic things, and no one talks about this anymore, is that human emotions are very transferable. So that if you're enthusiastic, then your prospect becomes enthusiastic. And William James, who was the father of American psychiatry, made a great discovery. He said that feelings follow action. So that if you want to be a certain way, all you have to do is act a certain way. And then Walter Chrysler, who founded the Chrysler Motor Corporation, said the secret of success is enthusiasm. And one of the things I've been challenging groups to do is when what would happen, think about this, what would happen if you made a commitment to double your enthusiasm? Second sales master is W. Clement Stone. W. Clement Stone started Combined Registry in 1920 when he was 20 years old. Started out as essentially an independent agency, wrote business for other companies, and what happened to him was in 1937 he was doing business with one company, and he got a letter from the company basically saying they were going to terminate his contract. And he called them, and basically they were able to work it out. But when that happened, he said, my income, my future, and the future of all my representatives is tied to this one company. He made a commitment that by 1954, he was going to have the largest accident and health company in the United States. And he achieved that objective. And I love Stone's approach. You can evaluate the principles I'm sharing by one standard only, the action that you take and the results that you achieve. And there's the sales principles from Stone: attitude, planning and study, a solid presentation, a success system, emotions are subject to action, goals are important, and then self-motivation. Now, the question I want you to think about here for a minute. Stone said sales are contingent on the attitude of the salesperson, not the prospect. I don't know how you feel about that, but I struggled with that statement for a while. But Stone gives 3 examples. First one is back in the middle of the Depression, his company started selling a new accident plan with commercial casualty. His representatives complained that it couldn't be sold. So what did Stone do? He went out, and for 6 weeks, he personally successfully sold the policy. And once he sold it, his representatives and his salespeople saw that it could be sold, and they started selling it. Second example is in the middle of the Depression again, he was working with an agent in Sioux Center, Iowa. And the agent had worked the town all day and didn't sell anything. And when he met up with Stone, he said, hey, the group up there is clannish. They're in the midst of crop failures. No one is going to buy anything. And Stone said, we're going back to the same place tomorrow. And he said, I'm going to sell, and I'll let you sell for a couple hours at the end of the day. They went back to the town, and except for one person in the bank, they sold every person they talked to. And when the sales rep went on his own for 2 hours, he sold everyone he talked to. Then the third example is there was a new agent starting out, and he had asked Stone if he could get if Stone would give him some referrals. And Stone said, no problem. He said, just come into my office tomorrow, and my secretary will have the names on 3x5 cards for you. I'll give you 10 names. The guy went out and got appointments with all 10, and he came in on Friday and said, those referrals were absolutely great. I sold 8 out of the 10, and I have appointments with the other 2. And he said, can you give me some more names to call on where I can use your name? And Stone said, I'm kind of busy right now. Here's the phone book. All I did was pick out 1 from the A's, 1 from the B's, and 1 from the C's. And the new agent did not believe him at first. Finally, he convinced him. And next week, he went out, didn't sell anything. The interesting thing is, when he used Mr. Stone's name, and he thought Clement Stone had influence over those people, he sold them. And most of those people probably had no idea who who Clement Stone was. So my question, is the sale determined by the attitude of the salesperson or the attitude of the prospect? Third sales master, Ben Feldman. Ben Feldman was probably the greatest life insurance salesperson ever. 1945, he qualified for MDRT for the first time. And then you can see the production that he had, 1956. And then finally, in 1969, he sold over $100 million of life insurance personally. Now, think about this. You know, we've had a lot of inflation since then, number one, so that 100 million means a lot more. And then number two, if you think back, the whole life, and almost all that he sold was whole life. That whole life was actually more expensive than it is today. And I love this statement from Ben Feldman. Only a fool learns from his experience. The wise man learns from the experience of others. And here's the principles from Ben Feldman: making calls, packages, don't sell life insurance, simple concepts, discounted dollars, cash value life insurance, put the premiums into perspective, ask disturbing questions, and then the last is focus. And with Feldman, I want to focus on one thing. I think this is something that never hit me until I actually sat down and started writing the book. One of the keys to Ben Feldman's success was he put together packages. And the packages were essentially bundles of whole life insurance designed to solve a specific problem that his prospects face. And I talked with his son Marvin, and Marvin was telling me about when his dad put the packages together. And he said he used to test them on their mom, the office staff, and then when they were in high school, Ben Feldman would test them on both Marvin and his other son, Richard. And here's the thing, stop and think about this. Ben Feldman believed that if his package, basically what he was presenting, was simple enough for a high school student to understand, then his prospects would understand it. And one of the things this really causes me to think about is, if you look at our presentations, are they simple enough so that the prospect really understands? And here's some examples of his packages. Basically, educational package, retirement package, grandparents plan, which back then was designed to take advantage of the gifting exclusion. And then I always loved the seesaw plan, and that was for business partners. You get two men on the seesaw, one gets off, and what happens to the other one? The other one falls off. And so it was designed basically to fund buy-sell agreements and make sure there was continuation of the business. And then the fourth is Joe Gandolfo. And Joe was probably one of the best life insurance salesmen. He eventually went off and basically worked with tax shelters and estate planning. But here's his background. 1965, he qualified for the MDRT at age 29. By 1970, he had set a goal to beat Ben Feldman. So in 1970, he sold over $100 million of life insurance. Then he set another goal to reach $500 million, and then to personally sell $1 billion of life insurance, which he achieved in 1975. And this happens to be one of my favorite quotes from Gandolfo. People won't buy what you're selling just because it has a low price. And you can see the sales principles from Gandolfo: attitude, sell yourself, goals, planning and imaging, study, your sales approach, presentation, and then referred leads. One of the best things I learned from Joe Gandolfo was how to get an appointment. And you can see up in the slide, it says, I don't want to sell you anything right now, but what I want to do is share an idea with you that's been of value to other or help to other auto dealers here in Lincoln. If it fits in with your philosophy and your pocketbook, fine. If it doesn't, I'll be on my way and you'll never see me again. Notice what he does. He says, I want to share an idea with you. You know, there's very few people who don't want to hear about an idea. And then the second thing is, notice how he picked out the specific occupation. And we're using auto dealers as an example. Basically, every industry thinks they have their own unique problems and their own unique situations. And they would rather deal with someone that understands those. And then the third is, notice I said Lincoln. People want to deal with people who understand, you know, their local situation. And my absolute favorite is if somebody says, no, I don't think I'm interested, my question is, you know, I want to ask you a question. You know, in 1899, the commissioner of the Patent Office suggested to President McKinley that they close it, the government could save money by closing the Patent Office. You know, that there were not going to be that many more inventions. And if you stop and think about it, since 1899, we've had cars, we've had radio, we've had TV, we've had computers, we've had smartphones, we sent a man to the moon. My question, Mr. or Ms. Prospect, have you closed your patent office? And then my favorite with Gandolfo, I used his approach for asking for referred leads. He talks about, he had an appointment with a slightly inebriated paint salesman. And he said he walked into the guy's place and he said he had all kinds of awards all over the place for selling for paint sales. And he said, how do you do it? And the guy said, simple. I just ask people, I need your help. And I need the names of 3 people like yourself, you know, who I can share the idea with. So, and then lastly with Gandolfo, this is something we really have missed it the last 20 years in the industry, is Gandolfo said, and he wrote a book about this, selling is 98% understanding human beings and it's 2% product knowledge. And we've kind of flipped it around and focused 98% of our attention on the product knowledge and 2% on the selling. Now, I'm not saying that product knowledge isn't important, but it's more important that we understand the human beings that we're selling to. And then the second section, and I'm just going to hit this real quickly, is Albert Ian Gray did a presentation to, it was the National Association of Life Underwriters, which is NAIFA. It was the predecessor to NAIFA. And he said he looked to find, as a manager of salespeople, what was the difference between successful people and and failures. And what he found is the successful people didn't like to do the same things the failures did, but they did it. And so I kind of went through this and said, okay, what's the common denominators between all these? Number one common denominator is every single one of the 4 believed in the importance of enthusiasm. Bettger, it saved his career. Stone, it was the most important factor in selling. Feldman, it's excitement in the voice, it's how you say it. And Gandolfo believed it's the key ingredient of a successful person. Second common denominator is make calls and see the people. Bettger tells a story about the president of Fidelity Mutual, who he was working with. He came in and said, and this guy had worked his way through every job in the company just about, and actually spent a couple of years on the street selling. He said, gentlemen, this business boils down to one thing. Show me someone who can tell their story to 4 or 5 people a day, and I'll show you someone who can't help but be successful. Stone, his sales reps went business to business, door to door. Feldman, nothing happens in this business until you make a call. Gandolfo, every no gets you closer to a yes. Third common denominator, planning and study. Bettger found that his whole career changed when he made a decision to get up an hour earlier, as he called it, the 6 o'clock club. And what he would do each morning is spend a half hour in study, and then he would spend another half hour in basically planning his day ahead. Stone, he encouraged very, very strongly all his executives that this was one of the most important habits they could have as an executive, was get to the end of the day, plan your next day. Feldman spent 2 to 3 hours a week in studying and planning, and Gandolfo spent 20 hours a week. And he also used visualization when he was planning out. He, in his mind, would go through his entire presentation and mentally answer the objections and everything else. Amazing. Here's the other thing that surprised me. If you look at each of the 4, they were basically focused on one market or one product. You know, Bettger focused on the business market. Stone and his representatives sold one plan, pre-issue accident plan, and when they introduced other products, they developed special distribution channels or special distribution groups to sell just the one product. Feldman, his market was basically estate planning and business continuation. And Gandolfo, what he would do would be he'd work through specific occupation. Like, for example, one point he did ministers, another point he did business executives, at another time he worked with funeral homes, and then towards the end of his career, he was doing nothing but working exclusively with automobile dealers. Sell yourself. You got to make the most important sale first. If you want to sell disability insurance, you have to buy it yourself. I believe so strongly that it should be illegal to sell a product that you don't believe in it enough to buy yourself. Bettger, he owned $1,000 worth of life insurance, and he increased it to $25,000 because he heard all the successful people being proud of their life insurance program. The next year after he increased it, he went from 92nd in the company to 13th. Feldman said as he increased his personal insurance, he sold larger policies. Gandolfo, if it's good for the prospect, it's good for the producer. The next common denominator is questions. And you'll laugh at this, but I did a meeting in Chicago about 6 months ago, and someone asked how I learned how to sell. And jokingly, I said, I learned from Socrates. And I said, I'm not that old, but what I learned from Socrates is that if someone disagrees with you, the best way to bring them to your way of thinking is asking questions that lead them in that direction. Bettger and Stone used that, and Feldman, one of his keys to success, he was the master of the disturbing question. And basically, he'd ask a disturbing question that really demonstrates that they had a problem, and then bringing the life insurance was the solution to that problem. And then the last common denominator, stop selling insurance, start selling what it does. Feldman's whole package thing were bundles of life insurance to solve a specific problem. Bettger and Gandolfo, they used questions very effectively to identify the problem. And when that problem was identified, life insurance was the solution. And that comes with a quote from Charlie Tremendous Jones. You're the same today as you'll be in 5 years, except for two things: the people you meet and the book you read. And I will qualify that with, instead of just the books you read, it's the MP3s that you listen to and whatever you are doing to create a process for constant improvement. So, Tracy, I want to thank you for inviting me again, and then if we have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Okay, Ken. Again, if you have any questions, I think you covered everything really well. You need to type them in on the question pane on the right side. Again, if you have any questions, you can type them in, and Ken can handle answering them for you. Ken,
and then I'll put a little plug in for the book. My book, Sales Lessons from the Masters, is available on Amazon.com.
Great. All right. I don't see any questions. And again, if you have any further questions, you can contact Ken or your local Plus Group office. We want to thank everybody for joining us today. Like I said, you will be getting a link by tomorrow, which will contain the webinar, including the audio. And again, if you have any questions, please go to our website at www.plusgroupus.com or contact your local Plus Group office. Ken, thank you so much for your time today. It was really
Thank you, Tracy.
great.
It's always my pleasure.
Thank you. Everyone, have a great day. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.